So instead, in my view, our interests are likely to remain extensive, and rightly so. But to protect and advance those interests, we need to place a premium on partnership with other countries. Those partnerships, in turn, are a reason for Australia to uphold a reputation as a secure, capable, reliable partner in the international system, what might have been called honour in the days of Thucydides. We need to be seen as a country that is serious about protecting its interests in the context of a rules-based order and respect for the rule of law. Such international credibility as a partner has a very hard edge to it. It's both an asset and a national interest in itself. Now, when these extensive national interests that I've listed are considered alongside the patterns of change and risk in today's world, and I won't go into great detail about those, but think of the projected global trends that you read about in reports such as those produced by the US National Intelligence Council, the publicly available global trends reports, one thing becomes very, very clear, and that is that the burden of security risk on Australia's interests is large and accumulating. So we need to refresh our thinking about how global trends will intersect and interact with our interests. Those trends include, very briefly, the impacts of disruptive technologies, of social media, of demographic shifts, resurgent nationalism, particularly in our region, but not only in our region, resource insecurity, environmental degradation and climate change. More immediately, however, among this widening array of risks, the most obvious, in my view, are the following three. First, the risk related to coercion, risks of miscalculation and conflict escalation in our immediate region and our wider region, in the Indo-Pacific or Indo-Pacific Asia. This relates, frankly, to how China is using its growing power and how other nations respond to that. Strategic competition and conflict in Asia challenges directly our security and economic interests. We can't hide from that. Secondly, the gradations of aggression in other parts of the world that we are seeing, notably by Russia. Despite the horror of the shooting down of MH17, Australia cannot afford to concentrate its limited security capabilities for long on the Ukraine situation. However, at least on this issue, we are one country that can afford absolute frankness in our diplomacy, and that can be of wider benefit to the international efforts to manage that situation. And thirdly, violent extremism, jihadist terrorism globally and now at home, and I will return to this in some detail later in my remarks. To go back to the first point, Australia's region is becoming more central to global power balances and strategic tensions. Powerful economic connections are making this the era of the Indo-Pacific, and I think that's becoming a widely accepted concept, not only in this country but now across Asia. These patterns include East Asian powers' deep and growing dependence on the Indian Ocean for its sea lanes, as well as on Australian resources for trade, for development, for energy. This is really about society. It's about keeping the populations of these emerging powers satisfied, their rising middle classes, and their societies stable. It's about making sure that the Asian century remains on a positive path. But these economic and social patterns are having strategic consequences. Witness, for example, the very fast emergence in recent years of China as an Indian Ocean naval power, with submarines in Sri Lanka and warships exercising close to Australia's Christmas Island. As the successful and simultaneous visits last year by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping spectacularly confirmed, Australia's region has found us and there's no turning back. Here, with the Indo-Pacific, we at last have a definition of our principally Asian region that automatically includes Australia. So I think that kind of ends at least one domestic debate. The downside is that this makes the region's tensions our problems too. This is an inevitability, it's not a choice. Regional power balances are changing with China's rise and its rapid growth year on year in military spending. Such change could encourage risk-taking by some states, whether by China, as it asserts its new strength, or by others, as they seek to set boundaries early in this new great game. Yet being closer to the world's economic and strategic centre of gravity makes it impossible for us to treat these unsettling regional security dynamics, such as in the South and the East China Seas, as if they were purely somebody else's business. Now, in all of this, we are far from helpless. The idea that our strategic weight, in its broad sense, is insufficient for us to have any impact on regional order, I think that idea is outdated and exaggerated. Australia can contribute to regional order and security, including as part of the emerging balance of credibility or balance of uncertainty that will be critical to deterrence and stability as China's power grows. We need to think harder about how best to make this contribution. This includes how to encourage other powers, other regional powers, through our own example, or through forming creative and functional middle player coalitions, if I can call them that, with Asian security partners such as Japan and India. Our central Indo-Pacific geography, our advanced maritime capabilities, our interoperability with the United States, and our regional surveillance advantages all provide us with an edge here. It's false, in my view, to suggest that the alliance with the United States comes at the expense of Asian partnerships or of pragmatic multilateral diplomacy. These approaches can be mutually reinforcing if we handle them smartly. The presence of US Marines in Darwin is already proving of some benefit to Australia in engaging third countries in training, as confirmed, for example, by a three-nation exercise involving China last year, and I believe there'll be more exercises with third countries in the years ahead. There's also scope for us to work much more with China as a security provider in the region, as the search for the MH370 airliner demonstrates. The need to find ways of working with China as a security partner will intensify as Beijing expands the pursuit or extends the pursuit of its Indo-Pacific economic and strategic interests through the so-called maritime Silk Road, which in my view is really Chinese for Indo-Pacific. The challenge is to ensure that closer cooperation with China does not come at the expense of our US alliance or of regional solidarity in upholding the right kind of regional order. That is one that recognises China's legitimate interests while also upholding rules and discouraging coercion. In all of this, we need to be realistic about the potential as well as the limits of security cooperation with China under conditions of regional mistrust, and we have to assume those conditions will continue. Navigating all of these complexities will require much better resourcing of our defence engagement, or what we might call our defence diplomacy, and that is not a contradiction in terms. This side of our defence policy has, in my view, been treated and resourced as a third-order issue, as almost an afterthought in some cases, for far too long. In all of these circumstances, we need to work smarter, as I've said, combining diplomatic and security capabilities precisely because our relative regional weight could decline as other Indo-Pacific powers increase their own through sustained economic growth. These do not just include China. They include Indonesia as well as India. We will want to focus on partnership with these powers while maintaining a sense of proportion and of national self-respect. True partnership works when others respect our interests and recognise that working closely with us is not about doing us a favour. It's in their interests too. In all of this, we should see technological change as involving at least as much opportunity as risk. Disruptive technologies will alter calculations of military advantage in our region, so we need to think anew about how to be on their right side. Australia has unique opportunities, as I've said, a combination of technology, of geography and the US alliance to keep and sharpen its edge in areas like surveillance and intelligence. We need to be willing also to invest considerably more in emerging capability areas like space, like cyber, and autonomous or at least unmanned systems, which actually suit quite well the characteristics of our geography and our small but educated population base. Australia also needs to be unsentimental and unapologetic about seeking and maintaining asymmetric security advantages in an uncertain region. After all, to reiterate where I started, our energy, information, trade and human links with the outside world make today's Australia a vibrant, prosperous place, but they also make Australia vulnerable. Thus, for instance, many Australians, including our business community, are becoming well aware of the ease with which cyberspace can be used for disruption and espionage by foreign entities. This should be of greater concern to the Australian public than Australia's own existing or proposed security measures, such as in the area of data retention. More Australians are also becoming concerned about the vulnerabilities of our seaborne energy supply lines and our frankly frugal stockpiles of liquid fuels, far below the 90-day oil stockpile obligations that we've signed up to under the International Energy Agency. The need to build energy resilience is emerging as a national security priority. Hence the appeal of interesting new ideas like converting metropolitan transport fleets to Australian natural gas to reduce an acute dependence on diesel imports. All of the risks and vulnerabilities mentioned so far suggest that the number and the kind of security contingencies or scenarios that could affect Australia's interests will grow in the years ahead. We'll be challenged to do more things in more places. As I've said, Australia's own security will therefore require a willingness to make judicious but meaningful contributions to securing our lifelines to the wider world. Australia will need to protect its sovereignty, to provide security in a troubled neighbourhood, and to contribute to the security of the broader Indo-Pacific and beyond. This will sooner or later involve questions about whether Australia alone can always be the security provider of last and sometimes first resort in the South Pacific and Papua New Guinea. In theory, a future security crisis across PNG could overwhelm our capacity to respond. To recapitulate then, Australia's interests are large and they're growing. Our sovereign security capabilities cannot keep pace, so there is a premium on partnerships to guard our interests in an uncertain world. New threats have not replaced old ones, but joined them on a more crowded horizon. We cannot protect our interests alone, and yet, to have the best chance of building and maintaining the partnerships that we need, not only with the United States, but the other partnerships we need, we must also have the credibility that comes with doing our best to provide for our own security. And so the concluding question I have for you is this: are we really doing our best? It can be argued that Australia continues to fall short of its potential as an effective security actor. We're still in transition from the Australia of the past few decades, a country that relied for its security primarily on the combination of a stable regional and global environment and a not particularly demanding US ally. Perhaps unquestionably it's become more demanding over the past decade. But now the strategic environment is less stable and the ally is more demanding still. And yet, frustratingly, it's becoming less than clear about its own strategy or its own priorities. Added to that, our own ability to set security priorities is being shaken up by worsening dangers of terror and radicalisation at home and worldwide. Now, of course, a national security statement focused exclusively on terrorism is a misnomer. It's incomplete. Amid entirely justified present-day fears, we must not lose sight of truly strategic risks. We don't want to find ourselves in a grand replay of the post-9/11 years. For at least 5 years after 9/11, a policy emphasis on terrorism, on Iraq and Afghanistan by America and to some extent by its allies made it harder to anticipate or respond to the way that China's rise would affect Indo-Pacific regional stability. We can't afford to go there again. But how then to set priorities? For instance, how to prioritise the immediate security threat, and I have no question that it's an immediate security threat, of terrorism, the wider strategic priorities of the changing Indo-Pacific regional order, and dealing with longer-term trends still like the security repercussions of environmental pressures and climate change. The simple answer, and it's a simplistic answer I know, is that we need a layered response, a response that deals with each problem on its own timescale. Nor should we imagine that all of these risks exist in parallel universes. They interact in ways that we are just starting to understand. A common thread is the way in which they threaten order, and improving our ability to respond to one challenge through demonstrating seriousness of purpose for a start, through building national resilience and through forming security partnerships can help to some degree in responding to others. Now, in acquiring our own new security capabilities to respond to this era of uncertainty, we do need to be constantly looking for flexibility, for adaptability, for versatility. Like it or not, devoting substantial resources to national security, broadly defined, will need to be an accepted part of the Australian policy landscape for as far ahead as we can see. In all, this is hardly a context in which we can afford our national security debate to become any more politicised, whether on counter-terrorism, whether on the alliance, the rise of China, the development of major capabilities such as submarines, or how to cope with a troubled neighbourhood. We need a maximum of political consensus on these issues. The good news is, of course, that a large measure of consensus and bipartisanship has long existed, for instance, on the importance of the US alliance.